Everyone, welcome to the Jacksonville History Show, brought to you by the Jacksonville Historical Society and Comcast. I'm Harry Reagan. Tonight, the most endangered list, buildings and structures that are in danger of demolition, being lost, preservation targets that the Historical Society is interested in saving. And our guest is Edward Booth, Jr. Welcome, Ed.
Hello, Harry.
You have been the chair of a committee working on this for some while.
That's correct. We are trying to identify and hopefully save a number of these historic structures that are important to us here in Jacksonville.
And briefly, what are the criteria that would lead us to list them?
Well, first of all, age matters. And normally a property needs to be 50 years old, have some sort of architectural significance, either due to who designed it or the period style it exemplifies. And also if something famous or significant took place in the structure, that could lead to it being desirable for preservation.
And needless to say, the city has lost some important structures, and I guess the real reason for doing this is to avoid that kind of thing in the future. Save some of these important buildings. It
certainly is. One of the downsides of a rapidly growing community such as Jacksonville is that a lot of our history is pushed aside in the push to modernize and redevelop areas.
Well, we've got lots of pictures of buildings that are on this list. And let's start out, they're listed kind of the number one group. Define what we'll be seeing at first. We can go ahead and start looking at this.
We have identified, Harry, a number of structures that we categorize as being in an emergency status, where there is recent catastrophic damage or circumstances that threaten the building that would require immediate intervention in order to save it. We're going to show a couple of examples of 4 or 5 buildings here in town that we believe are in emergency status right now. The first one is the Brewster Hospital. Brewster Hospital was built in 1885, originally as a residence, and was converted into a hospital in 1901. It was situated where it just avoided the Great Jacksonville Fire, passed within a block or two of it. And it was the first black hospital, and it served Jacksonville well until the 1950s, and has fallen into disrepair, has been moved once or twice, and now we understand the city of Jacksonville is going to save it and renovate it. Nonetheless, we think it still bears close watching due to its somewhat rapid deterioration.
And it might have to be moved, and preservationists would prefer generally not to have a historic building moved, but if it means that's the only way it can be saved, sometimes that is necessary.
Certainly, but it is a wonderful example of an early wooden structure, one of the earliest examples we have, as you can see here. A more recent building is the old federal courthouse, also the main post office in downtown Jacksonville, that has been abandoned for some 3 years now. We believe it demonstrates a style of architecture from the 1920s that's worthy of saving. Has some very interesting architectural details. Something I've always been fond of are the modes of transportation that are shown above the entrance doors. Here a 1920s era mail plane, a train from the era, and on the north entrance, a stagecoach and a ship. But it is a building that has stood the test of time, and we believe deserves to survive.
And one of the keys in all these cases is finding some new use for a building. This is something that probably could happen. This could be recycled and reused.
That's correct, and there's a proposal to utilize it as the state attorney's office for the new courthouse complex. We're concerned, however, that the historic courtrooms inside may be obliterated in that process, but nonetheless the future does look relatively bright for this building. Another example of a building that we believe is highly endangered is the Guarantee Trust and Savings Bank. Sits on the northeast corner of Bay and Ocean Street.
With the Jaguar inside.
With the Jaguar insignia on the front. It was constructed in 1902, right after the Great Fire, and was expanded in 1919, but it's an example of architecture from that era that we believe should be preserved. And probably Top of our list right now is the Hayden Burns Library.
It's certainly in the headlines now, isn't it?
It is. Even though age-wise it doesn't quite meet the criterion, we believe it's an example of architecture from the 60s that is worthy of being preserved, certainly not to be torn down to build offices and condominiums.
Just shy of the 50-year mark, which is ordinarily the threshold for becoming a preservation project.
That's correct, but it has some very nice details, and we believe that something should be done to somehow preserve it and utilize it in a new way that recognizes its heritage but finds a new and modern use for it. So here, those are the buildings that we believe are the most endangered here in Jacksonville, and we're going to talk next about the second priority, which is threatened.
Well, we'll just tell our viewers that you're watching the Jacksonville History Show, and tonight we're looking at Jacksonville's most endangered buildings, a list compiled by the Historical Society, and our guest is Edward Booth, Jr. Let's talk a little more about the main library, sometimes known as the Hayden Burns Library. It's the one. It's a good example of what we're talking about because it's just shy of the 50-year mark, but it is very representative of an era of architecture, which I'm not sure there's another one like it in the city. If this one is lost, they're all gone.
No, it's a perfect example of something from that era that should be saved. And we know that site has held the City Hall from an earlier century that was rather unceremoniously destroyed.
Sad to say that a loss in the preservation battle would be losing that building years ago when the Hayden Burns Library was built. But maybe the history won't repeat itself here.
There are proposals out there that would save it.
Well, let's go ahead and look at the second category, number 2, threatened.
And here, these are structures that are historic assets that have suffered or are in imminent danger of severe loss of structural integrity. And we do have at least 9 examples of these properties here in Jacksonville. This is public school number 4, the Annie Lytle School. Sits on the east side of the I-95 expressway as one crosses the north bank of the river. Perhaps the best vantage point to view this is from I-95 northbound.
You get a quick look at it.
You do.
If you're going 60 miles an hour or so.
But this was one of our first public schools.
Now, some schools have been saved and recycled into residential use and so forth around the city.
The old Duval High School on Ocean Street is an example. It was turned into senior apartments very successfully.
Corinne Scott in Springfield.
Correct. One problem we see with historic buildings, and this is a good example, this is a petition to replace the windows in the school. And very often window replacement obliterates a lot of the historic look of the building. And we'll see an example of that in just a minute. But here is the best view you can get from ground level of Annie Lytle because of the expressway system. So even if a building survives, sometimes it's somewhat obliterated by progress. A good example of a structure we've tried to save but have been unsuccessful is the Bayard Inn on US 1 south of Jacksonville. Was demolished just several months ago as part of a DOT project to expand the expressway. So that's one effort we were not successful at. This building, the Florida Baptist Convention building on Church Street, was built in 1924. It was one of Clutho's designs. And in fact, it was the last downtown building that Clutho designed, and something that is architecturally unique. And
I suppose a Clutho design automatically puts it in a special category that makes it worthy of trying to be saved.
I would think so. That Clutho is to Jacksonville what, say, Frank Lloyd Wright is to Chicago. It automatically makes a building
Clutho and maybe Henrietta Dozier.
Exactly. And we'll see one of her buildings in just a minute. Another example of a very unique building is the Ford Assembly Plant on the north side of the Matthews Bridge Expressway. Very few people have really noticed it. It's built in 1924, designed by noted industrial architect Albert Kahn, and it was last utilized during Super Bowl as a site of a number of parties, but it's deteriorating rapidly. The windows have been removed. This is a very handsome auxiliary building, but something needs to be done soon before it loses its structural integrity. It's open to the elements.
And there was an era when automobiles were actually assembled.
We're told
not in Detroit, but in Jacksonville as well, right?
We're told at one point 200 Model Ts a day rolled off the assembly line right here in Jacksonville. Another example of an endangered series of structures are the Hogan's Creek drainage system, also designed by Clutho. This was the largest public works project in Jacksonville up until the time. $500,000 invested in a drainage system that rid Springfield once and for all of its swamps, and continues to serve as a drainage system, but the architectural details are in some danger.
Indeed, and there is ongoing discussion of Corps of Engineer projects to improve the creek, make it perhaps even navigable. And I guess one of the, in a previous show on the Jacksonville History Show, we had someone from the zoo. That this used to basically be the location of the first zoo, and one of the reasons they had to move out was because of the constant flooding problems.
But these are on the endangered list as well. This is a very handsome structure over by Shands Hospital, the Lamprey Court Apartments on Boulevard. They were constructed in 1924. Half of it's vacant, this half is occupied, but they are structures that could be reutilized in a modern setting and we believe should be preserved. We're going to talk about our bridges. It's somewhat unusual to talk about bridges as historic structures, but I think the Main Street and the Matthews Bridge have stood the test of time, and particularly the Main Street Bridge have grown to symbolize the city of Jacksonville. And by this I mean the recent Super Bowl 39, chose a theme, which was building bridges, and they chose a logo, which you see on the screen here, which depicts a bridge, and the bridge it depicts is, of course, the Main Street Bridge, more properly called the John T. Alsop Bridge, named after our mayor from the 1930s.
Right.
These are some photographs of the Main Street Bridge on game day last February. It was a center of activity. This is an interesting view of the Philadelphia Eagles arriving in Jacksonville on Sunday afternoon to win the national championship. And again, it's a very distinctive structure that serves a useful purpose and we believe should not be torn down for a more modern structure.
Which they did not, by the way, win the national championship.
Yes. With their hopes
right.
to. Another view of the Matthews Bridge with the Ford plant in the foreground. This is another structure that is endangered, has come to somewhat symbolize Jacksonville, built in the early 1950s. But would be a shame to lose this structure.
Well, bridges are a special category, perhaps, and people might just say, well, tear it down and build a better one, wider, higher, whatever, but there's a certain historic significance to bridges.
Correct, and particularly with the Main Street Bridge, the proposal would be to build a fixed span structure, which would require starting back further, building elevated ramps that would obliterate the buildings underneath them. Would be very unsightly, and that's another reason we believe the Main Street Bridge should be preserved in its current form. Another view of the Matthews Bridge. Very interesting structure out by the Dames Point Bridge, known as the New Berlin Hotel, was built in 1880 by a Navy deserter named Thomas Gray. It is in somewhat disrepair. It's on private land. You can't even see it from a public road right now, but it's a structure that has some historic value and we believe should be preserved.